Hey, welcome back to Rebrand, where we've been exploring the evolving landscape of ministry and how we can adapt, grow, and lead effectively in this ever-changing world. Today, we're honored to have three distinguished leaders and pastors from the United Methodist Church, each of whom have been at the forefront of guiding congregations through significant challenges, including the impact of COVID-19 and the surrounding landscape of church disaffiliations. In this post-pandemic, post-disaffiliation era, many church leaders are asking the same questions. What does effective ministry look like now? How do we continue to live out our calling in new and creative ways? And how do we stay connected to our communities, remain faithful to our mission, and lead with hope? Our goal in this episode is to create space for shared wisdom, practical strategies, and honest reflections about how we can lead with hope, creativity, and a renewed sense of mission in these changing times. Ben and I are joined by three amazing voices in our denomination. The Reverend Rachel Billups, she's the lead pastor of New Albany UMC in Ohio, whose innovative approaches to ministry and leadership have made her a leading voice in revitalizing churches and reimagining outreach. The Reverend Matt Rawle, he's the lead pastor of Asbury United Methodist Church in Louisiana and a storyteller at heart. He blends culture and faith in ways that make the gospel accessible and relevant to all. And the Reverend Daniel Ogle, who grew up and was ordained in the Holston Conference and now serves as the campus minister of Westside Table in Georgia. He brings a deep commitment to preaching and pastoral care with a strong connection to both rural and urban ministries. Now that we've got the intros out of the way, I've got to tell you, this conversation that we had was very rich and fruitful. So much so that we decided to split it up into two parts. In this first part, we talk about the shifting role of ministry, post-pandemic and post-disaffiliation, leading with curiosity and contextual awareness, navigating emotional and financial challenges, practicing resurrection in ministry, and the need for connection and collaboration. I hope that you find these conversations as rich and hopeful as we did. So without further ado, let's jump in. Talking about the connectional system, you all talked about that a little bit today in the Beyond Generosity, being 1,000 miles apart.
Yeah.
Ben and I talked about this yesterday, having different
jurisdictions,
conferences, jurisdictions.
Okay, yeah.
Well, they got a lot of differences.
Obviously, we're going.
That's exactly what we're wanting to do here. That's right. Well, some of us. But it's so cool that we can really. One of the things the pandemic gave us was this digital age that we've talked about a little bit, and the connectional system. We should be living into that even more now, or we have the opportunity to live into that more now. I don't know if we take it or not. Some do, some don't.
Well, I think there's a difference between the library at the school and the playground at the school. And we were trained to navigate a library really, really well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, here's the information, here's the system in which to find it. This is the way to carry that knowledge. So ministry was relatively linear for us. There was a plan, there was a system. And now we're finding ourselves in the playground where we're kind of having to make up the rules as we go along. So increasingly, because at least for me, in my context, what was really valued early in ministry was your ability to follow a fruitful plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here's the plan. You get the book that says the 7 steps to a fruitful deal, and you follow that.
The 200 barrier, the 400 barrier, all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so we were trained in, you are a good pastor if you followed that fruitful path, right? Now, the one of the key characteristics is adaptability, the ability to pivot. So the skill set of following a plan is not nearly as valuable as building one as you go in a lot of cases. And in our case, especially post-disaffiliation, we are really having to figure it out as we go. There is no blueprint of what this looks like post-pandemic, post-disaffiliation. So we are having to be in the playground as opposed to the library in order for the system to work.
Yeah, I would say, too, I think it's the old Ted Lasso line, right? The curiosity is when I'm at my best as a leader. When I have my plan about this is what our church is going to look like, this is where we're going to be in 6 months, this is where we're going to be in a year, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But what works is, what's my neighbor who's at Publix, what's she struggling with?
Yeah.
Or what's going on at the elementary school? Or what am I seeing my people post about? what is animating them? And then that curiosity then drives ministry that's going to connect. Because I think there's so much content out there, right? And so people just scroll, and figuring out, like, what is animating their lives? What is keeping them up at night? And how do we speak and do ministry into that? That curiosity, as opposed to, well, when I wrote down my plan for planning my church, this is what I said we were going to be about, and this is what we're going to do. Well, that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Hey, I'm really curious. You've got 4 pastors up here talking about, well, not for you. For some it might be, but I know it's not for you. As a layperson, when you hear pastors talking about disaffiliation, post-COVID, leadership within the church being different, how does that speak to you? And how do you speak back into what we're saying here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think both as a layperson, but also as a young person in a space with some graduated young people.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, good.
Except Rachel.
We had,
Careful.
side note, we had a similar discussion like this at our annual conference, and we had one, in addition to Tim, one graduated young person, and she introduced herself as such, and now that's my favorite term for
graduated young
non-young
person.
people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think as someone who is new to the system of the UMC, I mean, I grew up in the UMC, but as far as kind of a member of the structure, it is easy for me to say, out with the old, in with the new.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that cannot be the answer.
Yeah.
That can't be the entirety of the answer, at least.
I think it's really important that we're constantly honoring one another. So I don't think we should worship the past. I don't think we should cling to the past. But I do think there's something important about honoring the past. I find so many people that are more seasoned than I am really are asking the question, am I worthy? Is my story worthy? Do I still matter? Does my story still matter? Does my experience actually matter? And so if you're in a context, even, I imagine, I took over for a pastor that retired. And so the retired pastor was nearly 70 years old, and then I came on. And when I came on, I was 42. Yeah, 42. So there was a 30-year gap, basically, between me and this pastor. And so I knew intuitively that just my mere presence would make people ask themselves the question, does my story still matter? And it was my job to say, absolutely, your story is always going to matter, because your story is part of God's larger story that we're narrating together.
I think a good metaphor of this is, so in New Orleans, food matters.
Yeah.
Like a lot. And the rhythm of food matters, right? You eat a king cake during Mardi Gras and only during Mardi Gras, right? We have a weekly rhythm of meals. Red beans and rice is Monday. Fish is Friday because of the Catholic influence. Thursday is always jambalaya, where you have your leftovers. The tradition of eating red beans on Monday is because it was wash day and it took all day. You were at home all day soaking laundry, washing things. That's why the red beans came about. But we still eat them on Monday because we're still honoring that tradition, but the technology of the labor has unburdened us in the same way. So the red beans is still there, but it means something different. So the tradition is still being honored, but the technology within that means that we're not having to wash clothes all day, but it's still there. See what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
The rhythm is still there, but the purpose is now a little bit different. Rhythm is preserved, but it's also forward thinking,
I know you're about to speak, as you should, but I'm really curious too. How do you feel that he doesn't consider you a young adult anymore?
Listen, the last time I was here, I didn't have glasses and I had more hair, so it's probably fair. I mean, I think one of the things too, definitely resonating with the conversation, because I'm not a generational expert, right? I know my life, my own story. As a pastor, we're trying to connect in a generational, multi-background congregation. And I've got to honor those who have been there longer than me. I've got to honor those who have been there a shorter time than me. And I can't know what I don't know unless I listen.
Yeah.
You know, I can't know what I don't know unless I'm listening to those stories. I don't have to follow the advice exactly as they would do it, but it is my job to listen.
Yeah. All right, I want to shift us a little bit. We've been here in the Beyond Generosity Conference, hearing from the three of you, along with Lisa Yabua, who was not able to join us for this conversation. But all four of you had some really fantastic wisdom and some back and forth with the members who are here. But I heard this theme from all of you, and maybe I'm projecting some of my own desires for our churches, our conferences, our denomination, to do hard things.
Yeah.
To take risks, to dream big goals, to hear with open ears what God is calling us to do, and then deciding to partner with God to take those risks. The difficulty is we now are doing ministry in an environment which has financial constraints that we are not used to operating with and are still discovering. And so another thing I've heard from you all a lot in the last 2 days is moving away from a scarcity mentality into a posture of abundance. So what does that look like in practice? How do we, in spite of our circumstance, how do we operate out of abundance?
Well, I think it's important to recognize the source of abundance and where that's coming from, because I think something that leads to our paralysis is that the source of our abundance has changed. For example, we assume abundance comes from an offering plate where someone puts something in it and it goes to a safe and it goes to a bank and you get the report on Tuesday, right? That may have changed, but that doesn't mean there isn't abundance in the community. You may have to do great work to figure out where that abundant spirit is moving. And this goes really great, I think, to the how do we hold on to tradition, how do we let go of tradition, right? Abundance is still part of our tradition as Christians. Period. That's part of who we are. We are resurrection people. Abundance is in our DNA, but the vehicle through which that happens might be radically different. So just because the regular vehicles through which abundance has been received, if that is becoming deficient, that doesn't mean there isn't abundance. We just might have to get very creative in finding where the abundance is coming from.
Yeah.
I'm going to move us in a very, very different direction.
Super.
So you might want to cut this out. We'll see what you decide. I think it's really important for us to confess the hard. I think confession and lament are really important. And so I think it's really important not to dwell there, but to really, like I say, tell ourselves the truth about ourselves. The last 5 years of my life and our collective lives have been really hard. I mean, I could go through and tell you that I became the senior pastor at Ginghamsburg in the midst of a mess. We had a failed $16 million capital campaign in the middle of a transition. We had 15 tornadoes rip through our area. We had a mass shooting just down the street in the Oregon district. I had different pastors leave for different reasons, some of them scandalous. I had to fire my very best friend who from the staff because of a lapse in judgment. And at the end of all of that, as I'm at the helm, and the pandemic as well, and we had a
There's that thing.
There's that thing, and I also had a cyber attack, and I could go on and on and on, all the things that I had to. And at the end of that, I found out my kid had a rare genetic disorder, and I needed to be able to say out loud, "What the hell, God? Come on, God! Like that's ridiculous." That's a ridiculous amount of hard. And let me say, it doesn't stop there. I mean, I ended up moving churches, and then my mom got pancreatic cancer, and my husband's going through a recovery journey. So, like, it doesn't stop. And I say all these things out loud because I want everybody who's listening in to say the things out loud that are in their hearts, because they're like, wait a second. I did this, and I had this, and this happened. And, like, so grief comes in waves, and all of that has so much grief around it. And I think it's really important for us, like our bodies keep the score, to not ignore the grief in our bodies, but to allow our bodies to tell us this actually happened. The pandemic happened. My favorite parishioner walked out the door. I got told that I was the spawn of Satan. I got this. I got all the things that happened in your kind of congregational life. And I believe to confess that and lament that and to put that right out there, but to actually also recognize that in the midst of all of the hard, there has been provision after provision after provision. I could tell you story after story after story of people who have shown up in my life in ways that I couldn't even ask or imagine. And I actually believe my faith has been shaped by going through the valley of the shadow of death more deeply. I don't know how this works. I'm not an expert in theology, but there is something about suffering. I call it beautifully horrific. There's a beautiful piece and there's a horrific piece, and somehow they can't be separated, but somehow are connected to each other. And so I just think it's really important that if we are going to thrive in the hard, we got to tell ourselves the truth about ourselves.
I think, sorry, Daniel, I think this goes back to our connectional piece too, because for me, when I was in the local church, one of the hardest parts about taking any type of risk was the fear behind it, the fear of failure, and maybe even more than the fear of failure was the fear of shame. What would my people think about me if I led them through something that wasn't successful? Part of that is being put up on a pedestal as a church leader. And part of that is just an internal struggle of wanting to be liked. And I know a lot of pastors have that particular issue, as I do so greatly. No, none of us. But we have this opportunity as a connectional system to be able to say that to one another, and to be able to hold one another in this place of, I go through that too. And just through that connectional piece can give us some of that courage to say it aloud, first of all, and then to move on to take some of the risks. So I think fear is the thing, at least from my standpoint, that kept me from doing a lot of risk-taking. And I'm sorry I jumped ahead of you.
No, you're fine. I mean, I think one of the ways I would respond to the question is around, like, I think the moment we find ourselves in, particularly from like a financial piece, like it does invite us to practice of resurrection, right? And so two of those for me are, what are we doing as a church, and what is our mission, and what is outside our mission, and how to use that as almost like a colander to run everything through. I mean, an example of that for us, early on when we started Westside Table, I got really connected to this incredible organization in our city called the Westside Future Fund. That's doing incredible work on helping legacy residents of these neighborhoods in Atlanta keep their houses in the midst of gentrification. And so was very involved in that, was invited to speak multiple times. Well, the more I got into it, I said, this is a great mission, this is a great organization, this is not our neighborhood. This is not our community, and so I'm not the right person to speak here. It also doesn't advance the mission that God has called us to. And then something I thought you guys spoke really well to yesterday was about then also, like, where are the resources that we're not used to looking for? So, for example, in our neighborhood, we've been really blessed to build a good reputation in our community. So we have business partnerships that come to us, and we partner on some things together. That might not come out of the offering plate. Those checks don't bounce either, you know? And so, like, I think, what are you really called to? Because I think sometimes we just do the things because we think we should do them. And then also, where are the resources that we're not used to looking for?
And I think with that, kind of to echo, when we talk about hard, like choose your hard, right? What is the risk? I think one thing that's been helpful for us is to recognize that every no is a yes and every yes is a no. if I choose to play catch with my son, I'm saying no to email, right? If I say yes to working on the strategic plan, I might be saying no to being at the bedside of someone in the moment. Every yes is a no, or every yes is a no, and every no is a yes. I think we falsely assume that activity is risky without considering inactivity being riskier.
Right.
Oh,
Right?
that's so good.
So one thing that we talk about is what is the cost of doing fill in the blank,
Yeah.
and what is the cost of not doing fill in the blank,
Yeah.
right? We tend to think that if we move forward, it is risky. That might be true, but not moving forward might actually be riskier in the long run.
In my moments of pessimism, I see.
As you say through a smile. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Sure. Well, I would like to think I'm not in one of those moments right now. So, but in my moments of pessimism, which come, often.
Yeah.
I often will see a church which doesn't believe that it can be better than it is right now.
Yeah.
I see a church that looks backward and says, man, I wish we could go back to that, but we got to just minimize the decline. And so I see practices and, small incremental budget cuts, and I see scaling back of things that we've been doing for 20 years that aren't really thriving, but we've been doing them, so we're just going to scale it back a little bit so we can still do it. Mm-hmm. But we're not making hard decisions to grow, to move into something new. So how do we start to have those conversations? I mean, it is risky to try new things, to believe, to take a step in faith towards something that might fail. How do we do that?
I think it's really important for us to look at the resources that are around us. I imagine that the Holston Annual Conference has some resources. I'm always looking to use my super friends to help a sister out, and I leverage all my super friends. This is why I reached out to Joe Park and Horizon Stewardship and said, hey, help me with this congregation. And Joe actually at that second had the bandwidth to help me. I know not everybody has a direct line to Joe Park, but I think I just maximize all the people in my sphere of influence because I know I'm not necessarily going to have the answers for the context that I find myself in. So I really do value outside voices to help see what I can't see. I'll never forget the first time that Joe walked into my building. I have a brand new sanctuary that's absolutely gorgeous in a community that's a planned community. I'm in New Albany, Ohio. In the 1980s, it was a cow town of 400 people. Now it's a community in the zip code of nearly 30,000 people.
Wow.
And just to give you a glimpse of the school system, 64% white, 36% non-white, and 30 countries represented, 25 languages spoken.
Wow.
The world is my parish.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I walk into a football game and you're going to hear multiple languages being spoken. But the average income of the community is $200,000. The average. The average house price is nearly $1 million.
Wow.
$1 million. So we are poor. We are poor there. I'm just letting you know. Like my kids, they know it. They know it. We live in a parsonage, and we're like, praise God for a parsonage. Anyhow, and so it's very interesting to me. He walks into my building and he says, Rachel, this side of the building is gorgeous, but I'm looking at your gas stations that are bricked, and this other side of the building does not meet New Albany standard. This is going to be an obstacle for you in the future. So sometimes you just need lots of other eyes who can help tell you the truth about yourself, because sometimes you can't see it yourself. I think that's really, really important. And I do think it's really important that people take some time to really begin to say to themselves, what is God's vision for this church? Now, I do some of this work with churches through this organization called System and Soul, both the system and the soul of the organization. It's actually secular, but it's beautiful, and comes out of Atlanta, Georgia, a guy named Benj Miller. Anyhow, there's a plug. Anyhow, so I'm...
His phone number is...
No, I'm just saying.
Yeah, flashing on the screen.
Yeah, anyhow. But it's really amazing work that I love to do because I really love to help churches really think about what's your plan? How are we doing this? And not just in a like, oh, we're going to, like, it's going to be, here's your 5-year plan, and this is what's... No, really, let's look at what's bubbling up from within you. I don't have any answers for these people. I'm just the guide who's helping them discover what's happening on the inside of them through the power of the Holy Spirit.
And here's what I've discovered, especially with the narrative of let's get back to, This is part confession, because I've heard, well, Pastor, we need a plan. We need to build up children's ministry. We need to build up youth ministry. We need to build up our worship services again. And what I'm beginning to discover is those things didn't serve us very well because of where we are now.
Yeah.
When church got hard, people left. What I mean by that is the disservice that I did to them by entertaining them on Sunday mornings
Say that, preacher.
meant that their justice muscles atrophied. So we say we need to get back to 2018 or 2019. What I want to say is that didn't serve us well because of where we are now, because church got hard and it wasn't fun and it wasn't entertaining anymore. We had to dive into real issues. So if we go back to that, we have not solved any of the problems that we're currently facing.
Yeah, I would say I think one of the things Lisa said this morning is we look back to look forward, right?
Yeah.
We remember God's faithfulness so that we can step forward in vision and courage. We were talking about this earlier. Several years ago, I was told that I had to have heart surgery. You remember that?
I do.
And so one of the things that taught me is that most people don't make change until you have to.
Oh, say
You
that.
know?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things I would want to say is that, like, we need to give our people grace that
Yeah.
change is really hard. These things, kind of going back to the conversation about respecting people's stories, is that these things were important. They served a purpose. They made a difference in people's lives at some point. And part of my job as a leader is to help people see that maybe that was a season. We're going to step forward into something new. That doesn't mean this thing didn't matter. It just means we're trying to do what's going to serve the people God has called us to do now. And so, but also giving them the grace that say, on our own, most of us are nostalgic.
Yeah.
It's with God's grace that we can move forward because it's really hard. I like to eat a burger and fries for lunch every day. That's not going to lead to heart health, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so that makes me think. Another thing that Lisa said today, she said, we could not have gotten here without them. We might not be able to go where we need to be with them. Mm-hmm. And I think she was speaking about people pre- and post-disaffiliation. I think that can maybe be extended. I hope she's okay with me co-opting her language a little bit, but that could be extended to
sharing her language
that's,
is what
you
she
know
said.
What?
Yeah,
that's right.
sharing.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
To some of our practices and our traditions, that there might be some things that have gone to the wayside out of necessity because of COVID, and maybe they weren't that important. Maybe they were things that weren't integral to our faith communities that have now given us space to grow in new directions.
Yeah, Ben, I would say one of the things for me in just a very practical, actionable way as a leader is I've got to surround myself with people who are going to let me fail. Mm-hmm. Like, I've got to surround myself with leaders who are willing to take risks. At Westside Table, we're blessed with folks like we've done some things that have worked really well, and we've done some things that it was crickets in that house. And no one has ever criticized us for anything we tried. They've asked us, why didn't it work? Could you have done this better? Should we do it again? If we do it again, what about this? But I think if we're got to move forward, leaders need to know that when they step out, that the stage isn't going to disappear beneath their feet. Mm-hmm. And so I think how we create support structure so that we can only take risks when we feel supported. And so I think that's really important.
And that's hard to find in a time where our budgets, right? Like, it's hard to allow ourselves or to allow those around us to fail when it feels like the stakes are higher.
And I think there's a particular DNA of the community in terms of generosity. I mean, your community of faith is incredibly generous. Not so much that they like give you space to fail, but they trust you as a leader, period.
I have so much trust that I did not earn. I mean, it's ridiculous, the amount of trust that people have in me. I mean, from the moment that I stepped into a congregation, and I want to say that's not normal. And so the moment I stepped into the congregation, and I'm in a community that is known for innovation. I mean, this is where the $20 billion Intel chip plant is. Google's there, Amazon's there. Like, and so I'm surrounded by people who are, but I want to say this, like, if you're listening in and you're like, oh gosh, it must be nice to be in a community like that. Look, I grew up in a church, in a 2-point charge of 50 on a great Sunday in Appalachia.
Appalachia.
Appalachia. Yeah. Appalachia.
You just lost.
I know.
50% of our viewers.
Anyhow, so I grew up there, and I just remember this little country church somehow. Now they might have 35 people on a great Sunday. You know, it's still United Methodist Church. I could go back to my home church right now, and somehow all of those more seasoned people discipled me well. Yeah. There was a resilience in my people. There was this like hard work ethic in my people. There was this sense in which those stories that we learned about, whether it was Esther or Daniel or David or Moses, like were stories about our lives as well. And so I was formed in such a way that it was okay to take risks, and they gave me opportunities to take risks. I can remember being like 13 years old and being a liturgist, and I'm dyslexic. I cannot pronounce any Bible names. Forget it. And so as I'm
Appalachia.
Oh
yeah,
my
exactly.
God, it's Pentecost Sunday.
I know.
And there's 15
I know.
nationalities.
So like I would butcher it every freaking time. Like I was terrible at it. I mean, gives me anxiety just thinking about it now.
You want to read Matthew 1?
No,
Is that
no,
what you're
please,
saying?
no, sweet Jesus. Even to this day, no. Don't make me do that. And so, but because they were willing for me to fail.
Yeah.
At 14, and 15, and 17. It made me real. I had a safe space to fail, and I imagine that there are some pastors listening in that may like be in rural places where they're like, "What resources do we have?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You have so many resources in your people because they've been through some things, and if you can just tap into that resilience and that grit and that hard work ethic, like you can storm the gates of hell with fire suits on."
That's all you get for part 1, but part 2 is coming very soon. Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. We hope it sparks some new ideas and reflections for your own ministry and leadership journey. But we're not done. Be sure to check back very soon for part 2, where we'll continue this discussion and dive even deeper into topics like combating hustle culture, finding Sabbath, being risk takers, and the evolution of connectionalism in the UMC. In the meantime, we would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us via email at rebrand@holston.org. Follow us on Facebook by searching for Rebrand Podcast, or keep up with us on Instagram at rebrand_pod. And of course, you can always find more episodes and resources on our website at rebrandpodcasts.com. We'll see you for part 2.